The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by the Clean Power Consulting Group. I'm Tim Montague, your host. Today on the Clean Power Hour, the solar coaster. We're going to do a deep dive into the ups and downs of the solar industry with a gentleman who has been through many of those ups and downs. My guest today is Nobel Chang. He is the managing partner of a solar and storage developer called Palladium Energy, based in Florida. Nobel is based in North Carolina. Welcome to the Clean Power Hour.
Thanks for having me, Tim. Glad to be here.
Looking forward to learning more about your journey. Real quick for our listeners, give us a snapshot of your background and how you got into solar, and then we're going to do a deep dive on some of the ups and downs that you've experienced over the years and why you think the solar industry has such a great future.
Yes, sounds good. So I'm the managing partner and co-founder of Palladium Energy. I lead all things business development and commercial strategy here, which means I am in the front end of the development lifecycle, forming new market strategies for our team to focus our origination and development efforts on. I also identify, originate, and secure commercial offtake for our projects. The best part of my role really is that I get to, speak with folks like you and, connect with the industry and, push solar along with a big focus on people. And so that's really exciting. And I got into the industry after the real estate crash in 2008. So I started my first solar career. I started my first full solar job in late 2009. I joined a semiconductor company called Topco Scientific based out of Taiwan, which is where my parents are from. My first project was an off-grid wind, solar, and battery system, little 1 kilowatt systems where we got to deploy these all over Asia and Africa and saw lights turn on where they never turned on before. And that got me, I fell in love with solar renewables ever since then. So that was kind of my start with the renewable industry.
So what was the context for those off-grid systems that you were selling?
Right. So I was part of the project team where we designed these small systems for rural applications. So, for off-grid systems where, light bulbs never existed. And so,
Right.
They're probably still operating now. It was a very fun foray into renewables.
And what company was that?
That was Topco Scientific, a publicly traded semiconductor company based out of Taiwan.
Topco.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are they still doing their thing?
To my knowledge, they're still around. Yeah, they're still on the stock market operating in Taiwan. They're not in the U.S. anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely still going.
Interesting.
Yep.
All right. So what is the solar coaster? We solar professionals know what we're talking about, but for anybody listening who's not a solar professional, what is the solar coaster? And let's dive into it. What are some of the, highlights from your career, and then we'll just we'll do a forward-looking discussion as well.
Sounds great. Yeah. So, the solar industry kind of experiences like an incredible amount of volatility and unpredictability, like so much so that we've collectively coined the term the solar coaster. And so I would say, the solar coaster hits about every 2 to 3 years, almost as if the boom and bust cycle of the economy, one major economic cycle, we get, 3 of those per every one. And so I think, we get a lot of experience along the way. And I've been a developer, essentially my entire solar career. And I started my career in 2009. Someone once, when I told that to somebody, they called me grizzled, and it took me by surprise. But I suppose time flies when we're having fun and experiencing kind of
That's
solar
a nice
coaster
ring.
events.
Nobel Chang, grizzled veteran.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that, but I'm a pretty optimistic person for having to go through a couple of solar coaster events. So, when I joined the industry, we were on the heels of the silicon shortage that started in 2004. So I missed that one, fortunately. In 2005, the Bush administration passed the Energy Policy Act, which created the ITC. That's essentially the economic engine that started the renewables or the solar industry. However, not much happened at that time, given that 2008, there was a economic kind of financial crisis, so, But then when I started entering the solar industry in 2009, we started seeing this uptick, at least for me. But the utility scale industry was virtually non-existent. My first utility scale project, was a 1.5 megawatt project in Southern California. I was able to secure a feed-in tariff PPA with Southern California Edison under a CREST program. Those are good times when PPAs were 20 pages long, and most of that were signature pages. So, and build costs at that time were $6 to $7 per watt to build. And so it was going up. We had the 1603 cash grant that helped kind of boost the solar industry, and got a lot of projects done. I got my first project hit NTP in 2011. That was around the same time that Solyndra went bankrupt. And so the government put a good amount of money into Solyndra, and that going bankrupt, really halted a lot of kind of U.S. manufacturing at the time. So, people were kind of skittish at the time. So that was, I would say that was our first solar coaster event.
And for anyone who doesn't know, Solyndra was a kind of a bleeding edge thin film solar manufacturer. We do still have a thin film manufacturer called First Solar, which makes, which is one of the largest, native solar manufacturers in the U.S. Thin film is a niche. Most solar is not thin film. It is what we call crystalline technology, right? But and it's funny how people love to pick on the government because of the Solyndra debacle. What they forget is that there were many successes. Right there, Solyndra was a failure because crystalline technology beat the pants off thin film. Right, it just wasn't competitive at the time. I'm not sure how First Solar survived, but here they have kudos to First Solar for sticking to it. They figured it out, and my understanding is that technology works, or it pencils really best at large scale for utility scale. And that seems to be First Solar's niche. But anyway, so you got into the industry in 2009, and then you experienced your first major downturn when?
To 2011. That's when Solyndra went bankrupt, and there were a lot of watchful eyes on the solar industry. That was the very first one. I mean, I would say starting out, I didn't know what a PPA was. It felt like every week was a solar coaster ride, but that was definitely the first macro event that hit the industry.
Yeah. And then when did it come back again?
What you said earlier about, there were a lot of other investments made by the government that helped prop up the solar industry. And, we saw this really quick jolt downward, then it kind of went back up. And, we got a lot of projects done and went on around the 2012, 2015 range. And kind of across the country, we saw the solar coaster start to go up in, places like North Carolina, Texas, Massachusetts, kind of those Northeast markets as kind of started to build up from other feed-in tariff programs. So that was a kind of a really good time kind of going up on the solar coaster. But then the very next one was probably in 2012 when the Obama administration set us down a path of tariffs on equipment. And so this kind of impacted my company directly because we were funded by the Taiwanese manufacturer. And so, they decided to no longer operate in the U.S. and we had to fend for our own at that time.
Yeah. And what happened?
We had to raise money elsewhere. And back then raising money was very tough. People looked at Solyndra going bankrupt and said, well, what makes you different from them? Obviously a very different type of company, but we were very nascent at the time. The solar industry is younger than Amazon is as a company. And so, we didn't have the track record as an industry to kind of raise really good capital to back the momentum.
Yeah. I mean, I'm commonly saying that 2010 is kind of when the solar industry took off in the US. Of course, the technology's been around since 1954 when the modern solar cell was invented at Bell Labs in New Jersey. But it was isolated to space applications and mountaintop telecommunications, remote applications. And then there was this slowly growing off-grid solar and battery storage for remote applications. And as you mentioned, solar was quite expensive back in '09, $6, $7, $8 a watt. Now we're talking less than $1 a watt. And when you say, let's just say, when you say $7 a watt, are you talking about the panels themselves or the installation cost?
All in cost.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So now we're commonly below $1 a watt for anything like a megawatt or more, right?
Right. Well, except for maybe this year, but we'll get to that in a little bit, I suppose.
A little deja vu, perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay. So then things were good again in 2012 to 16 or
maybe like 2015 or so. We saw this, we started to build up. Solar markets started to percolate across the U.S. Developers got there, financing became a little bit more sophisticated, and developers more sophisticated, going to different markets. And so it was a really interesting time to see kind of projects pop up out of nowhere. I was developing projects in California and Oregon and Washington at the time, doing the QFs there. And so the perception of renewables at the time is that these utilities were definitely looking forward to and like really working with developers to get projects through. But also around that time, the 2012, 2013 era, we started to hear about the duck curve. So the duck curve is when, we have a lot of renewable penetration at a specific time of day, and then that energy becomes extremely cheap. And so, the more renewables that come online, the more it kind of cannibalizes itself. And, that was, as California is one of the first solar markets, we saw that happening, starting to happen in 2012, 2013. So we were kind of aware of that. And about 2015, the REMAP program that we, that I developed, started to kind of go away and start to get, caught up in legislation traps, and then had to start to look elsewhere. So, and in 2016, the next duck curve started to happen. The next solar coaster event started happening. SunEdison went bankrupt in 2016. It was a major blow to the solar industry. I think a lot of us were hoping that it would be a scalable development shop then. And so, what that did was it made financing projects a lot more difficult, selling projects a lot more difficult. We got a lot more of a watchful eye, and people were a bit more, hesitant to kind of jump into developing projects. There was a few months where it seemed like everything paused. And then SolarCity was absorbed by Tesla, and the dreams of this developer being scalable was kind of crushed at that moment. And so it was very, very difficult to develop projects during the 2016, 2017 period. So I ended up.
Let's dwell on SunEdison just a little bit, because Jigar Shah, the founder of SunEdison, who was on the show recently, he's now the head of the Loan Program Office at the DOE, at the Department of Energy. So check out that episode at cleanpower.group/podcast. Jigar Shah, JIGARSHAH. And Jigar is, probably, one of two or three most famous solar professionals in the United States. Because of his work at SunEdison. They brought the modern PPA to the United States. And what year did SunEdison start? Do you know?
I don't know when they started. I just remember the big event when they filed for bankruptcy.
Well, and Jigar Jigger sold SunEdison, right? So then it was under new management when the wheels fell off, and
That's
I
right.
don't know all the gory details of that. If you're listening to this and you know the gory details of what happened to SunEdison, I would love to talk about that on the show sometime. There's so many SunEdison alumni out there, doing great things in the solar industry. So, dozens and dozens of people, have started companies and are very successful in the solar industry. So there's a lot of value in that legacy. So anyway, SunEdison goes bankrupt. That puts a freeze on solar finance. I can appreciate that. And that's very, humans are very herding animals, right? We follow the crowd and trends and styles ebb and flow, right? And finance is one of those things, right? It's a very psychological thing. It's not necessarily grounded in reality. Because, when you think back, yeah, the world is now massively transitioning away from legacy energy, coal, natural gas, nuclear, into wind, solar, and battery storage because of the economics of those new energy sources, right? They are just more affordable and provide a greater ROI for grid operators and for facility owners. It's a both and, right? So continue if you would.
Yeah. So, but back to your point about essentially the SunEdison alumni now creating a lot of, successful companies. And I think, the solar industry, we've seen it time and time again. We learn very quickly and we have a ton of grit, right? And so, with every single up and down, I think, collectively we take those lessons away and, create better companies and, do better projects. And, with that kind of history now looking back, we have the power of hindsight to learn from and to not kind of repeat the mistakes of, of things that happened in the past. And, we're a very nascent industry. And so there are bound to be kind of ups and downs, but, if we could all learn from those and, create better, systems in place and create better companies and, learn from our mistakes. And, I think we're doing that. I think the solar industry will continue to grow and, kind of foster more good people to get into the industry and to continue this momentum that we're having. I think it's really an interesting fact that, that we do kind of brush our shoulders off and then move forward.
Yeah. Well, it's a both and. I think that people do recover and there are these macro trends and then these micro trends, and we're kind of looking at some of the micro trends. But there's also this common phenomenon that when humans discover new markets and they take off, they can be a rush, like the gold rush, that when gold was discovered in California, it drove many thousands of people to move there to seek their, to really become prosperous. And many people did, but it was a both and it was a boom and a bust. And now we have, for example, the lithium bubble, which I'm starting to coin that phrase because prices have just skyrocketed. And that's because of the adoption of electrification of transportation and the adoption of stationary storage. Those two phenomena are driving massive adoption of and need for lithium batteries, but it's probably going to collapse and then come back to a normal state of affairs. What is it, a year or 2 years? Who knows? But it just can't continue to just go up, 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 right? Lithium is an extremely common element. It's the third most common element in the universe. So ultimately, we're going to have plenty of lithium. There will be bumps in the road, just like any industry. So anyway, I digress.
Yeah. History doesn't exactly repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes, right? So it happened with, like I said, 2004 silicon shortage, right? And that's going to happen to every commodity, from lithium to wheat to everything else. And so I think, it will come back down. I'm quite
Yeah,
positive.
this year
There's going to be some sort of technology.
This year we're having food shortages. We're going to have wheat shortages because of the war in Ukraine, and we're going to have fertilizer shortages because Russia happens to make a third of the globe's fertilizer for farming around the globe, right? And now everyone wants to stop buying Russian products, and the Russians may not want to sell their products to certain countries. So anyway, but yeah, continue with your journey, Nobel. What was the next phase, so to speak?
Yeah. So after 2016, I started to look abroad at markets abroad. I was born and raised in California, and so Mexico was the next place I went. And so I went there and was able to complete a 20 megawatt, and went to Chile and Argentina and Japan and did projects there. But what that taught me was, the markets all comprise of very similar things of legislative, regulatory pressures and competition and all of that. And so I think that taught me a lot about how to look into different markets. But I wasn't able to gain that knowledge if this solar coaster event didn't happen. So there's some positive to kind of take out of what happened in 2016.
Now, you mentioned a 20 megawatt project in Mexico. What year was that? And tell us a little bit about that project.
Sure. And I think, I set foot in Mexico in 2016, 2017. That project was already halfway through development. But I was able to take in my experience of financing projects to kind of get that project across the finish line. That was a project that sold energy to municipalities to power street lighting. And so it was a very, very fun project to work on, and got to travel there quite a bit and eat some pretty exotic food. So it was an exciting time to work in solar.
I don't understand though. You developed a 20 megawatt solar farm to fuel the lighting in a particular city, or tell me a little more about that.
Right. So the PPA comprised of kind of contracts with 5 different municipalities in Mexico. At that time, there was a regime that allowed energy that was sold to the grid to be banked. They call it an energy bank.
Yeah.
And essentially we were able to sell that energy at any time while feeding it into the grid. Since then, that regime has been kind of X'd. So no one can do those types of projects anymore. Sure. But definitely saw the benefits of time shifting, especially with battery storage coming into play now. But I think we're able to pay for really expensive energy if we shift energy from the daytime to the nighttime.
Yeah. Okay. And what was the context though that you were working in Mexico, Chile, and what other country you mentioned? Oh, Japan.
Argentina. Yeah. So I started my first development company in late 2014, 2015 timeframe, and I was developing projects in California and the Northwest markets, but saw an opportunity, saw markets kind of opening up in Latin America and Central America. So decided to give it a go, if you will. And so taking the lessons learned that I have from developing projects from Greenfield all the NTP and getting them financed and built, taking it to, taking it elsewhere.
Okay.
Yep.
So where do we go next?
Yeah. So next, the next kind of big solar coaster event was when about 2018, when the Trump administration introduced the 4-year tariffs, and that was a huge solar coaster event in my opinion. So we saw kind of widespread hiring freezes. Projects were put on hold for years. I mean, it was a very painful time to be in solar, while at the same time complexity, was increased like tenfold. I felt, right. So, we got what that time did. Let me start over there. So what that time taught us was, we had to be extremely creative in a way that we get projects across the finish line and do things in a methodical way where, we understand that projects always take longer than we initially planned. So we got creative with financing structures, reached into institutional investors and got them involved in tax equity and debt financing, and just the financing of the financing horsepower of the solar industry increased significantly during this time. So yes, it was a major downturn in the solar coaster, but I think we as an industry again showed our grit and creativity and still got a lot of projects through the finish line.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Clean Power Hour or viewing it on YouTube. We do have a great YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed, please go to cleanpower.group and hit that YouTube icon and subscribe to our channel. Of course, you can find all of our content on your favorite audio platform as well. So please give us a rating and review. Back to the show. Yeah, we didn't feel a big downturn here in Illinois until 2020. And that was because of the rec market drying up. We saw the panel increases in 2018, but the gravy train was rolling here, and a lot of procurement had perhaps been done. And I before I forget, you mentioned earlier the ITC. The invention of the ITC was a major incentive, right? We currently have a 26% investment tax credit, and that is like it is like a deduction, right? It's a very generous credit, which is trying to be extended for good reason. And some people say to me, Tim, solar and batteries don't happen without incentives or subsidies. And my retort is, all forms of energy are subsidized. And John Weaver and I have been, promoting the statistic that the fossil fuel industry is subsidized to the tune of $6 trillion globally per year. It's a massive subsidy that governments around the world provide. And so they understand, right, that when you provide that fuel, so to speak, that makes the economy cook. And that's what governments want, because then there's tax revenue to fill their coffers to provide infrastructure and make the place a great place to live and attract the best and brightest. And we have to be very careful here in the United States, because for a long time we have been the place of choice globally and a massive, magnet for top talent from Asia and Europe. There are signs that the United States may not have quite that glow anymore. And there are signs that China is passing us in some key technologies like artificial general intelligence, which could be a very serious national security threat. And I think clean energy itself is a national security threat. As we see, wars are fought, and we're not just a victim here. We are a perpetrator as well. Wars are fought for fossil fuels and for energy. And that is partially why Russia invaded Ukraine, is because Ukraine is rich in energy. And China is planning and delivering on that plan to substantially green their economy. They're going to approach 25% wind and solar on their grid in 2025.
Wow.
And so that is a very aggressive stance. And if you can make energy cheaper than somebody else, it frees up resources to do R&D, to do education, to do other things that then positively feed back and strengthen your society and your economy. So anyway, it's so intriguing, Nobel, that you are you're such a risk taker, and you not only got into this nascent industry very early, but then became an entrepreneur in this industry and and took some big risks. I don't know if you want to comment on that. Has that always worked out for you, or have you gotten some bumps and bruises along the way?
Bumps and bruises along the way, that is for sure. So we started Palladium Energy in 2019. I started with two other folks, and one's Danny. I worked with him previously, and then he worked with Mark before. And so we banded together and said, "Hey, we have the skill set to make this happen." Danny leads all things project finance and M&A, and then Mark leads all things development. And so we kind of banded together to say we can do this. So I think when I first started my development shop in 2014, I didn't have partners like Danny and Mark to watch my back. Essentially, I'm a forever optimist, and I think I'm a generalist too, and so I kind of do a little bit of everything, and I run forward and push forward to make things happen. And so, we just have to kind of pick ourselves up when we get punched in the face, and I think that's the grit that comes along with a lot of other solar entrepreneurs too. That we're continuing to kind of get hit in the face by the solar coaster, but every single time we pick ourselves up, it's a major lesson learned, and we go through these quick iterations of lessons, in a very short amount of time. And so I think the knowledge base builds up rather quickly. But yes, definitely have some bumps and bruises along the way, but I wouldn't change anything for it.
Yeah. Well, you identified that we got tariffs in 2018 on solar panels, and that jacked up prices. Now we're facing another challenge per se related to tariffs. Do you want to start talking about the current situation?
Yeah, sure. So the anti-dumping countervailing duty, or AD/CVD, was something that was brought to light by Auxin Solar's petition in, I think, February of 2022. So we're currently hitting another solar coaster event. What that has done is the Department of Commerce started an investigation on where these solar cells are coming from. I think the AD/CVD petition, essentially wants to make sure that there's. Let me start over. What that has done was. What the AD/CVD has done is essentially put a premium on modules coming from Asia, certain countries in Asia. What has effectively done, and I got these kind of quotes just 2 days ago, has increased module pricing from 35 cents at the beginning of the year to about 50 to 55 cents today. And we don't see this kind of clearing up until August. This is when we'll get a preliminary understanding of what the Department of Commerce, what their investigation has yielded. I think the investigation is supposed to conclude early next year. So there's definitely kind of a volatile time for module pricing, coming from these Asian countries.
Yeah, my understanding is that Auxin, which is an American company based in Silicon Valley, they make solar panels, is claiming that product is making its way from China to other Southeast Asian countries, where these major solar companies have propped up manufacturing plants. And, the supply chain is, you make silicon ingots, then you convert those to wafers, to cells, to modules. And it's very hard when you're just looking at a solar module to know, well, where did those ingots come from originally? And Auxin is claiming that product is moving from China to Southeast Asia, and it could well be, but the greater question is, well, if we didn't have tariffs on products from Southeast Asia versus if we did, right? And we have to remember that the U.S. is only 10% of the global solar industry. We're small potatoes. If you're a major manufacturer, let's say a Trina Solar, you don't necessarily have all your eggs in the U.S. basket. To the contrary, you're paying attention and you're happy to sell product into the US market, but your company is not made or broken on what goes on in the US. To the contrary, our industry is made or broken on these phenomena, right? If you jack up prices all of a sudden, it throws off these financial models, it throws off the ROI of projects, it throws off the payback period, and thus it slows down the ability of developers like yourself to secure financing for projects, right? It takes money to develop projects. These are real estate projects. So most people in the industry think that Auxin has some other influence. It's not just about Auxin, it's about some other influencers in behind the scenes who are trying to give solar a black eye. And unfortunately, it's not that hard. and, and so we're struggling through this. We will get through it. And there's plenty of growth still going on in the solar industry. So if you're new to the solar industry, do not slow down. There's nothing but pure growth for 30 years in solar and storage. 50% of the globe's grid power is going to come from solar in 2050. One way or another, that phenomenon is going to happen. And that is largely because solar is the cheapest technology. And so it's just a question of, do you want to benefit? Do you want your economy to benefit from this gold rush or not? And it's also good for so many other things, right? It's good for cleaning the air and improving human health and improving resiliency of individual homes, but also the grid. So many good things are going to come out of the clean energy transition. And so anything that slows it down is ultimately bad for America and bad for Americans. I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts though about this Auxin petition?
I don't know where it's going to go, but what I do know is if we zoom out, we have been hit with tariffs before, and the solar industry has recovered. The solar coaster is hitting us now, and it feels very, feels really close to home. But there is a track to the solar coaster. It will move forward. It will go back up. And so, to pull on a thread that you said, those who are early in here, we're going to have more of these. But the solar industry has so much momentum. We've been around long enough now that we can see the bigger pictures, like the stock market. There will be ups and downs, but the developer can earn staying power by developing really good projects, and to not getting caught up in the frenzy of what you see or hear. Prepare for it. You wouldn't ride a roller coaster without seatbelt, so prepare for it. But I think it'll continue. The solar industry will continue to grow, just like you said, Tim.
One of the greatest hedges, I think, against the ups and downs of the solar industry is to make sure you are working in multiple markets.
Absolutely.
Like here in the Midwest, Illinois was a boom and a bust, and now we're booming again. This time we probably have a 10-year boom in the greater scheme of things, so it's going to be a smoother ride. But many of the developers that I met back in 2017 and 2018 who were just coming into Illinois for the first time said, hey, this is going to be a rocky start. They had been around the block and they'd seen these greenfield markets. They tend to take off very quickly, but then get saturated. And the program, whatever it is not able to keep up with that activity. And that again is just human nature, right? We see opportunity and we go. And then when the opportunity dries up, we pull back and we slow down and go elsewhere and figure it out. And so it was painful when it busted. And I was working for an EPC that was pretty much only working in Northern Illinois. And I'm going, we have to figure this out in other geographies. And that was quite painful. But lesson learned.
But definitely, it is definitely painful. And, if you pigeonhole yourself into one market, you're going to feel that pain a lot worse. And so I agree with you. The one big way to make sure the solar coaster doesn't throw you off is to diversify our project portfolio, right? We're utility scale developers with projects across the US. And so, when the interconnection reform happened in PJM, we were not completely beholden to to the risk there. We had other projects in other states and markets. And so, that's definitely a way to protect yourself from, getting thrown off by the solar coaster.
What Noble's referring to is that PJM has said, hey, we're going to put this interconnection queue on pause for 2 years because it's so crowded and we're so under-resourced that we just need to take a deep breath and evaluate this situation. And, it's very telling how powerful these ISOs are. And this is the grid on top of the grid that we're talking about. When you look out at the power lines in your community, you're talking about, the ComEds and Amerens of the world. Those are the companies that are delivering grid power to infrastructure. But on top of that is this much bigger organization that is managing. I mean, PJM is the largest ISO in the country on a population basis, I think. It covers many, many states. Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, that's where it gets the name PJM, but it covers northern Illinois, it covers parts of Michigan, and then all of Pennsylvania and many parts of Maryland and New Jersey. So it's a huge geography. And then, the other ISO here in the Midwest, MISO, is also very, very large. And then you have some that are more niche, like New York is its own ISO, New York ISO. There's a Northeast ISO for New England, or New England ISO, sorry. California has its own ISO. And then there are parts of the country that don't have a concrete ISO. But to that note, Nobel, tell us a little more about Palladium, what you guys are up to, what you're looking for, what types of connections you want to make, and just how you kind of see the development landscape.
Sure. So Palladium Energy, we're a utility scale solar and solar plus storage investor and developer. We're funded by a group of family offices, who really trust us. And, when the interconnection reform happened in PJM, we were very upfront with them, and, they saw the need to continue to invest. And, we're waiting the 2 to 3 years that it's going to take to get these projects across the finish line. So, I think we pride ourselves in our, efficient M&A and diligence processes, and our team, we have a boots on the ground mentality, and so all the projects that we have now, we have a very high, a high probability of making it through, because we set foot on every single project. We understand it from a land perspective, from an interconnection perspective, permitting, financing, and et cetera. We develop projects with the end in mind, which is to get them built, which also means that we don't chase every single project that comes across our desk. We look for really good developers to partner on, and we have this kind of analogy is where we want to partner with developers that want to bake more pies or bake a bigger pie, rather than taking a slice of a single pie. And so, we're happy to work with developers and to, continuing onward, forward-looking developments. What we're looking for are, developers that want to partner with other developers, and with a little bit more, let me start over. What we're looking for is to partner with developers who want to work with a group like us to help finance and to take the projects to NTP. And so, if you're out there, please give us a shout.
And the scale of project, what is in your mind, what is the sweet spot for the types of projects that you're going to develop?
Right. So our smallest project is about 35 megawatts. Our largest is 100 plus megawatts. And so, while we don't have a maximum size that we're looking for, we do have a minimum. So, they have to be utility scale. We're a small and nimble team, and, for us, we're able to be small and nimble because we're working on projects at scale, and we like to develop projects of this size. So, and we're looking at markets all across the U.S., especially in the deregulated markets.
And in the pre-show, you and I were talking about storage and how storage is increasingly being tacked on to many small and large solar projects. What is driving that in your mind?
Like I said, I've seen the duck curve coming its way since 2012, 2013. And so, that is probably what's driving most of our projects having storage on there now. There's, to be able to transition from an intermittent resource to a resource that can provide energy at a moment's notice, anywhere, an energy resource that's able to produce power at any time. We need storage on there, and that's kind of the next frontier of renewables development.
Yeah, batteries are so multidimensional. They provide multiple value stacks, not just energy on demand per se, but they allow for operating off grid or when the grid goes down, or providing ride through for manufacturers. Here in Illinois, we have very generous storage incentives now. There's no upward bound on the size of the storage project. You have to pair the storage with solar. That's one of the requirements. And thereby you have to meet the requirements of the ITC generally for the project to make financial sense. So there is kind of a ratio. A rule of thumb might be 1.3 to 1 storage to solar. But we see some very large storage projects happening with the Vistra portfolio. For example, we have something called coal to solar legislation here in Illinois, where Vistra Energy, a utility from Texas, owns a fleet of coal plants that they're solarizing and storagizing. And some of them are storage alone, and some of them are solar and storage. These 10 to 150 megawatt power plants. And that's just one case in point. But literally, if you're a resident or business owner or facility owner in Illinois, you definitely want to talk to your energy developer about storage and how that can make a project pencil better, and reach out to me. I have worked on a handful of solar and storage projects, and I know how to put the team together. It is a team sport. There's only a few companies that understand these niche markets. We're in PJM and MISO here in Illinois, and you need those local players to really attack the local market. If you've been working in California, you don't understand Illinois. You understand California, and California is a good storage market, and that's why there is, a growing penetration of storage in California. Demand charges are expensive, and you can attack demand charges with batteries. Here in Illinois, we attack capacity charges, for example, which are a cousin to demand charges, and they can be upwards of 30% of a customer's energy bill. And so when you can bring that down, you can really make an impact on the energy bill. And solar alone pencils very nicely, but when solar and storage pencils, it's a multiplier. So if you have, say, $5 million in ROI on a solar project, you might have $20 million of ROI on a solar and storage project. And so it is a new day. Now, the greatest challenge, Nobel, that we face with storage right now is supply chain issues and the price of lithium and the supply of batteries. There is a shortage of batteries globally. That is going to be a up and down chronic issue, right? Because we're at a tipping point. It's ice, water, or ice, EV. The internal combustion engine is going to fall by the wayside because of the economics. You can now have an EV that goes 1 million miles for the same price as an ICE engine car, and the value proposition is completely changed, and it's game over for the internal combustion engine. Americans don't see this. Most Americans have no recognition of this reality, but it's coming, right? You cannot stop it. It is an economic force, and it is going to completely sweep the economy. And it's just a question of, will the Fords and GMs of the world survive, right? Tesla will be there. They're on the right side of this equation, and both with stationary storage and with mobile storage. I noted just this morning that Toyota has announced a residential storage product initially for the Japanese market, but literally you're going to see everybody who makes appliances and cars and already electronics is going to be in the storage industry, right? And when you look at those manufacturers, the Panasonics of the world, the LGs, the Samsungs, if you make electronics today, you make batteries today or tomorrow, most likely. What else in the last few minutes we have together, Nobel, should we talk about?
I kind of want to talk about, scaling. Let me see. I think. Let me think. What are your thoughts? We should talk about here.
I mean, if it's run its course, it's run its course, and that's fine. And we don't have to talk about anything else. I mean, you and I talked about the long-term prospects for the industry, right? Even though there are these bumps in the road, and there's a lot of news about this tariff situation and how it's putting projects on hold, but there's a backdrop, and that is that the global economy is in transition and is going to continue to make the transition from legacy to wind, solar, and battery storage. And so there is a tremendously bright future for our industry.
Got it. Yeah, Tim, I think the last thing I want to throw in there is, the solar industry and the renewables industry at large, we have a very bright future ahead of us, right? So, we have institutional investors, coming into the space every single day. Developers are attracting incredibly smart talent into the field. And I think projects, albeit getting harder, projects still are making it through. It's only going to become harder, but we need, great developers, great financiers, great investors to come into the space to continue to invest. The renewable energy transition is happening. There's momentum behind it. No matter what the solar coaster throws at us, I believe the industry is strong enough now that it will continue to grow, and it will. I think, as long as we prepare for it, we understand it, let's stick to it. Now we have the power of hindsight to know that this too shall pass. The tenacity, the kind of creativity, and the stick-to-itness, of all the folks in new energy transition is almost palpable. And sometimes we have to laugh at the stuff that kind of comes at us, but we have to continue. If we could fight the fight, we should.
Well, you can find all of our content at cleanpower.group/podcast. Please give us a rating and review on Apple and Spotify. That helps other people find this content. And we are growing the energy transition. We need thousands and thousands of other professionals to come into the industry. And so please give us a rating and review. With that, how can our listeners find you, Nobel?
You can either contact me. My email is nchang@pd46.com or visit our website.
Awesome. Well, I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage. Have a great day.
Thanks. Sounds good.